Welcome to Happy Planet, the Impact Economy podcast where we speak with entrepreneurs, investors, and thought leaders in search of profit and planetary health. I am your host, Abigail Carroll. Today's episode takes us to the Philippines, at least via Zoom, where we speak with Nanette Medved-Po, who in the early 90s gained regional fame for her rendition of Wonder Woman in the Filipino version of the classic movie. Now she's using her personal brand and influence to combat plastic pollution, which, as we will hear, is a particular problem for the Philippines. Nanette's solution was to found the Plastic Credit Exchange, a credit-based plastic ecosystem designed to incentivize communities to clean up and properly recycle plastic pollution, to systemize, track, and monitor the recycling process, and finally, to offer a platform for businesses and individuals to purchase credits to offset the plastic they can't yet eliminate. One acronym you will hear in this episode is EPR. That means Extended Producer Responsibility, which holds producers responsible for the collection and recycling of specified volumes of plastic that they produce and place into the market. As we will hear, EPR laws are making their ways around the planet. Let's go to the podcast and hear it firsthand from Nanette. Welcome to the podcast, Nanette. Thank you for coming. You are not only the guest from the further distance, but you might be the most celebrated guest I've had on my podcast so far. You've served on many really fabulous boards, including the WWF, the Hunger Project. You've won numerous leadership awards, both regional and global, and you've also been named one of Forbes' Heroes of Philanthropy. Now you've co-founded the world's first plastic credit exchange. But before we get into that, I'd really love to hear, how did you get interested in this sort of mission-driven work?
Well, thank you for having me, Abigail. How did I get involved? I think everyone, to some extent, wants to make sure they're being helpful, right? And I think that that's something that's true for me. And it just became more obvious how I could be helpful, I think, in my entertainment career in the Philippines. People in the movie industry, have quite a bit of influence over the public. And I really wanted to make sure I was using that platform for something good. So I started off that way, wasn't quite sure how I was going to go about it, did quite a few, little things here and there to try to be helpful, serving on boards, trying to raise awareness around lots of different issues until I eventually started HOPE, where, 10 years old now, we were the Philippines' first B Corp. We continued to be best for the world, every year since our first awarding. From HOPE, whose flagship product is a bottled water that comes in a plastic bottle, I became very worried. For our bottled water, 100% of the profit goes to building public school classrooms with the Department of Education. So we felt very proud about that initiative. But then we really worried that, well, if we're trying to help in education, but they were polluting the planet at the same time, I'm not quite sure how much good we're doing. That really forced us to take a hard look at plastics. It's a very complex situation around plastics. How do we try and do our best if you have to serve your market in plastics? And then that's how the Plastic Credit Exchange was born.
Very interesting. So can you tell us a little bit about your backstory in the movie industry?
Oh my. Yeah, so I started when I was in my teens. It was very fortunate to have a great career, which I guess people mostly remember me as being kind of our local version of Wonder Woman, every girl's little dream. So, I think that's what people most remember me for, which I guess doesn't hurt when you're trying to do the kind of work I'm doing.
No, I think it's great. And I think taking on plastics requires that Wonder Woman spirit.
Yeah, for sure. Or something. I don't even know if that's enough.
Firstly, just to address the hope issue, I feel like that's a trap we get into. You want to push one lever or create one thing to solve one problem, and there's always other effects that happen. And it's so hard to anticipate or do it all right on the first try. So I think it's a really important lesson too in how to move forward and then reflect on what you've done. And maybe the reflection on what you've done actually leads to the much bigger problem solving that you can do.
For sure. I think that to your point, we always start out trying to do something helpful, and the truth is nothing's perfect, and you will come across challenges. And actually, that's really a great thing, because you're unlikely to be the only person experiencing challenges in that space. So if you can really kind of put your mind and your team's efforts behind trying to solve that, you're probably going after a much bigger problem, which is what we found with plastics. We never thought we'd find ourselves in this space.
It's universal, it's enormous, and you're on the other side of the globe. And in the Pacific Ocean, there's the big plastic island. You're in the Philippines. Is Philippines a place that is particularly impacted by plastic pollution?
Absolutely. So, just to demonstrate, the Philippines is actually infamously known as the third worst offender for ocean plastic pollution. And the truth is that's not entirely our fault. We are the recipient of a lot of developed countries exporting their waste to us, and we don't actually have the infrastructure to deal with it. I think the government likes the revenue streams that come in with accepting the waste, but then we don't know what to do with it once it's here.
So let's get to the meat of this plastic credit exchange. Tell me how it works.
Let me go back to kind of how we started, and that's the best way to tell you how it works. So what we do is we work with projects, mostly small community-based projects who are working on the ground where they feel the problem intimately. Whenever there's flooding, there's trash everywhere. I'm sure you've seen this on TikTok or on YouTube, and people really suffer. So we work with these communities to collect plastic waste, and we do this, the way we incentivize them is we actually pay them. So it's a waste to cash program. And we feel that that is the best way to create behavior change in communities is through money, right? You don't see glass or paper polluting the streets because folks will pick it up, and send it over to their junk trader, and they'll get some money for it. So we're trying to create that same financial incentive. So we're paying for plastic waste, and then we work with women, micro entrepreneurs, to collect that waste. They are the station in the community. And then we pick it up from her, paying her a commission on that so that she's making some money as well. And then we take that plastic to a processor who we have pre-vetted for environmental compliance and labor compliance and all of those things.
Okay, so what does that mean to process it? What is happening to these plastics that are being collected?
Well, it depends, right? So I think a lot of people don't understand that plastics, there are thousands of kinds of, ways that you could have
not all
plastic. Yeah, they're not all plastics created equal. Not all of it's recyclable today. Even if it is, and this is what was horrifying a lot of the folks we spoke to in the US, people painstakingly separate their plastics, thinking that it's going to get recycled. But in the US, your recycling rate's actually lower than the rest of the world. It actually doesn't get recycled. It actually gets dumped all together somewhere and then gets shipped off or whatever, right?
I think that's because China stopped taking it, right?
Yes, they did start, and wisely.
And they sent some of it to you in the Philippines, I think.
Yeah, and about 17 other destinations. But anyway, So what happens is, even if you do have plastic content, like let's say a brand tries their absolute best to make sure that their packaging becomes recyclable material, whether something is recyclable or whether it gets recycled is two completely different things. And in many cases, it is not going to get recycled. So even if a company goes to recycled content, you have between a 4 and 9% chance that it's going to get recycled, which is not great, right? So what we do is we work with collectors to separate that plastic into what can and can't be recycled in the country it's in. Because the last thing you want to do is then ship plastic again somewhere across the ocean to another country to get recycled, because then you're to your point about creating another problem, then you're creating a problem in the carbon space, right? Because you're having to transport trash. So what we do is we separate, depending on the country we're working in, because we do work in a few right now, we separate plastic that can be recycled, send it to the recycler, and anything that cannot be recycled, which we are going to call end of life in this conversation, we send it to end of life processors. And that is, and this is where it kind of gets tricky, because when people think, oh my God, you're burning it. Well, yeah, if you're thinking about burning, your grandfather's incineration 60 years ago, that is problematic. But nowadays, there are actually some processors who actually abide by the UN Basel Convention on emissions guidelines and are incredibly safe. Singapore is a very good example, right? Has this. And there are countries around the world who have co-processors or waste to energy providers who pass the Basel Convention guidelines, and those are the guys we work with. So if there are 20 co-processors or waste to energy processors in the Philippines, we might work with 2 because only 2 of them passed the audit for Basel Convention. So yes, we do send them to waste to energy or co-processors, but we make sure that they are Basel Convention compliant, because I'm horrified that I might be taking plastic out of the ocean and then putting it in the air, right? Which is completely counterproductive. So we did go to the UNEP, and they gave us a position, and they said, look, in countries that lack higher level infrastructure to recycle plastic waste, and by the way, not all recycling is actually good, right? Some of it is very polluting. They do recommend Basel compliant co-processing or waste to energy. So that's the direction we went. Now, is it perfect? Absolutely not. So our aspiration is that we get enough momentum around plastic recycling, plastic credits, so that we can invest in the kind of infrastructure that actually gets us to this whole circular economy that everybody's talking about, but actually doesn't exist, right?
Right. Well, it's got to start somewhere, right?
Yes.
And I heard it was called Incineration 2.0.
I mean, Singapore is amazing, right? What I thought was super interesting is there was some information that the emissions, that the air quality on the emissions that were coming out of their facilities was actually cleaner than the surrounding air. And I was blown away by that. I was like, really? But no, you're right on the incineration 2.0. I think the word incineration has a lot of baggage around it, but to the point that the UN is making, there are technologies out there now which are quite clean. The problem is not everybody's invested in that because it's super expensive, but you want to support the guys that have done it, right? And so we have a couple of them here, and so we do work with them. And they process it and provide us with all the documentation that goes into our blockchain. And this is what has given us quite a bit of credibility so far. Is I'm not a tech person, but this is the application that blockchain was made for, right? It's a very physical tracing of where did you pick up some plastic, how much did you pick up, what kind of plastic was it, where did it go, and what did they do with it, and what was the output, how environmentally compliant are they. All of those documents are actually uploaded into our blockchain. We provide that end to end. There's a lot of certification that goes on in between. Like I said, we certify the processors under the standard PPRS. We are the very first standard for plastic offsets in the world. So if we have a partner, let's say we work with Pepsi, or we work with some, small next gen brand out there, when they say this is what we're doing, people can be very confident that there is no greenwashing, because they can actually go onto our public registry, click on, okay,
the blockchain.
What these guys saying in press real? And look at it and actually challenge. And we make sure that so there's no conflict of interest. We don't actually do the audit. We work with third-party auditors who, no point in checking your own paper. There's no credibility there. So we use either PricewaterhouseCoopers, Ernst & Young, or Control Union to go out and do the auditing and submit a recommendation for certification. We do that for the processor, but we also do that for our credits. We have what's called a process audit. They come in and actually look at all our paperwork to make sure that's all kosher and says, okay, this looks legitimate. We're going to allow you to put it up on the blockchain. So we put enough safeguards in place, I think, that some of the bigger folks out there who are very compliance driven have trusted the work that we do. So yes, this is a huge problem, but The good news is not only did that spur the birth of something like the plastic credit exchange to address that problem, but governments are really starting to take notice. In fact, the UN moved very quickly this year to at least work on a treaty that should be done by 2025 to make sure that countries around the world are signed up to really put compliance in place to address this problem. And the Philippines this year passed the most aggressive EPR legislation in the world for plastic. So we, at the end of the 7-year period, will have actually required any company of significant size to be 80% responsible for their plastic footprint. Now, I'd love to say that it'd be 100, but 80% is pretty aggressive considering what's out there right now, and I'm happy to take it today and keep working on getting to 100.
For sure. There's two paths here, if I understand correctly. One's sort of a partner path where a corporate will subsidize the activity that you manage. They'll pay you to manage cleanups. Yeah. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And then there's another option, which is that pretty much anybody, if I understand correctly, can go onto your website and buy plastic credits.
Yeah, so this is something actually we just launched. What we were trying to do was, in the process of talking about our work, you're talking to people, individuals at the end of the day. And each of these individuals has some really visceral experience with plastic. Whether you get your food delivery and it's like, oh my God, there's so much plastic everywhere. Or your Amazon delivery or whatever. Or you walk over to a beach and there's plastic everywhere. So there's this real personal experience around plastic. And so a lot of them have said, I would do this personally, like even if my company, because if you want to do it at a company level, you need quite a bit of buy-in from quite a few folks. But at a personal level, I'd really like to make sure that I'm taking care of my personal plastic footprint. And so we thought, that's a really great idea. Why are we just focusing on the big corporates? Why don't we go where this is a really not only very personal, but very genuine sort of move on someone's part. And so we offered just like 2 days ago, a personal offset option where you could offset your personal footprint. You can offset the footprint of you and your spouse, or you can do it for your whole family. So we've kind of got this package now, which it goes straight to the consumer. So folks can actually take action even if the brands they love don't, right?
Right. This is interesting. So how do you know how much to offset?
Okay, so I was asked that question last night. They were saying, how come if you offset in the Philippines, it's only 20 kilos, but if you offset in the US, it's 150 kilos per person? We don't create that data. That data actually
I know why.
Yes, so per capita, the US actually has the highest consumption per capita in the world for plastic. So you have the largest plastic waste footprint. So if you are in the US, it's 150 kilos to offset your personal plastic footprint. But in the Philippines, your personal plastic footprint is only 20 kilos. And we get this information from large organizations like the UNEP or the World Bank. They will have this information. They go about the rough job of having to compute what that might be on average per person, and we just kind of take that and use that as our guideposts when we offset people's footprints.
We'll be right back with more Happy Planet in just a moment. For a blue economy to thrive, people need to use more sustainable products. But which products? And will consumers actually adopt them? Innovators like you are hustling to figure this out. Spark number 9 can tell you if there's demand for your product. Spark markets your product before it's built using online advertising so you launch smarter. Have a big idea? Vet it with Spark before you build. Visit Spark online at www.sparkno9.com or find them on LinkedIn. Maine Venture Fund is a state-sponsored venture fund here in Maine with a mission to support the highest potential Maine-based startup companies by investing early-stage capital. Maine Venture Fund's goal is to accelerate job growth and economic opportunity for the people of Maine. Learn more at mainventurefund.com. Welcome back to Happy Planet. In this second half, we are going to come back to the concept of EPR, Extended Producer Responsibility, which aims to set standards for companies to deal with the plastic waste they create. As we are going to hear, the UN is about to help raise the bar for the world. So, the corporates that get involved, what do they get from this?
Well, yeah, it depends. But if you are in the Philippines, you are now doing this for compliance reasons. And that is a wonderful thing. And if the UN does its job by 2025, pretty much every country in the world is going to have a compliance credit. So they will require businesses to take responsibility for their footprint post-sale, right? So that's how it would be in the Philippines. But in fairness, there are a whole bunch of especially these young next generation brands in the US who really are concerned. They don't have a compliance from the government, so it is a voluntary action, but they really are aligning with the values of their customers and saying, you know what, we really want to walk the talk here. We want to be a sustainable brand. It is affordable for us to take responsibility, and so we want to do so because our customers care about this, and people in our organization care about this. And usually these smaller companies, founder-led, can make a decision very quickly about creating impact for their brand and for their customers. So people can go on to Amazon and buy their deodorant or their Alco-Gel or whatever, not worrying about where that plastic footprint goes.
Right. There are going to be naysayers about all of these credit exchanges, right? With the carbon credit exchange right now, we've got a lot of people saying, no, it just incentivizes. The fossil fuel companies will just keep making fossil fuel and we won't see change. What do you say to them?
No, I say that's a super important voice. And I said this the other day when Greenpeace was presenting as well in Congress. These are super important things that need to be said because it keeps folks any groups like ourselves on our feet monitoring what could go wrong. Now, I know our name is Plastic Credit Exchange, and I probably didn't think that through well in the beginning.
It was pretty clear to me where you could go there for.
So because today we are not an exchange, we are a marketplace, kind of like an Airbnb for plastic projects, right? We're not an exchange yet, and precisely because we didn't want folks to come on and just be thinking about how much money they could make trading credits, right? That's not what we're trying to do. What we're trying to do is gather as much support as possible for projects around the world who are trying to do the right thing. And many times these are small projects, community-led, a lot of times nonprofits, right, who really need funding to scale up the good work they're doing. And so we are actually today just a marketplace. And what I would say is all of those criticisms that you experienced around carbon, we actually looked at. If you go onto our website, you can actually see, whether it's double counting, additionality, traceability, transparency, all of those things are legitimate concerns. And I think if we want this space to progress in a meaningful way, all of us, not just PCX, really need to look at that and solve for those risks in our business. And so, thank you for being vigilant to all of you who worry about these things.
It's a pretty monumental thing to be the first to sort of measure, to think about and figure out how to measure and verify in any of these exchanges. How did you figure out how to get the information and bring these pieces together to initiate this? I'm sure others are going to follow. How did you figure that out?
Well, the truth is I'm sure anyone can relate to this. Plastic is actually so much easier to guard against fraud than carbon. Both Sebastian, our CEO, and myself, when we speak at conferences, we ask folks in the room, how much carbon do you think there is in the room? How do you feel about it? And everybody is just kind of looking at each other huh? You need a PhD to even start to think about how you would compute the carbon in the room or how you feel about it, right? But then when we follow up and we say, well, how much plastic do we have in the room, right? And so people look at the plastic bottles and on the tables, and it's well, the truth is anybody can go out and measure that plastic. You put it in a bag and you weigh it, and you don't need a PhD to do that, right? And so in our case, it's super easy to validate impact on plastic because it's physical. You can touch it, you can weigh it, you can take a picture of it, follow it wherever it goes, and measure and scan it at each place, so that at the end of it, you can have very definitive data on what happened. And whenever we deliver a credit, it is impact already delivered. It's not, you have to have faith that we're going to do it at some point at the end of the year or 2 years or 5 years from now. We only deliver credit once we can get every single data point in that value chain that says it was collected, it was weighed, it went here, this was the environmental compliance, and this is what came out of it. Unless we get all of that information, there is no credit.
So the plastic that you're pulling today, these projects, and I'm assuming if anybody has a cleanup project, they can come to you. And the goal right now is to pull all of this plastic out of the natural environment. Is that correct?
Yeah. Aggregating or collecting projects are pretty easy to get included on the exchange, but we do need to make sure that plastic isn't just collected. We need to do something with it, because if not,
that was my next question.
You're just moving plastic from one place to another, and there's no benefit in doing that, right? So what we do is we say, okay, if you're collecting plastic, that is super. Let's make sure that we are sending it to the right places so we can complete that process before we issue a credit. And so if those folks don't have something to do with the plastic, we then partner them up with a processor to make sure that entire process is done so we can issue a credit. But we will not issue, only one part of the credit, because how do you know what they did with it? They might have just left it on the beach and then it blew out into the ocean again, right?
So do you have plans to expand globally? You said you're in a few countries right now. Are you going to come help us out in the United States?
Yes. The funny thing is, I think Americans, and this is something that I was pleasantly surprised about, Americans do take these kinds of actions very personally. They want to know, they don't want to rely on government or big business to kind of meet the requirements of their own kind of personal values. So they do take action personally. They feel strongly about something. They want to take action. And that's something we see more in the US than we do anywhere else. Like in the Philippines, this is not so much a personal thing. It's a corporate thing. But in the US, Americans really do care on a personal level and want to do something about it. So yes, we are going to the US. We operate at I think 5 or 6 countries right now, but the truth is because Americans understand that plastic is a global problem, right? Just because you're polluting in Manhattan doesn't mean that your plastic necessarily stays in Manhattan.
Right.
At the moment, we find that folks are pretty agnostic as to where they're cleaning up the plastic waste, and oftentimes people want to help out in the places where the crisis is the most severe, knowing that we're all in this together. So we're super excited about working with folks in the U.S. and companies in the U.S. to try and progress this issue, even if it's not happening at the national level with government. We're super, super encouraged. I mean, there's no market like the U.S.
Yeah, and we're going to have to, it sounds like, recycle some of our own trash.
Yes. The truth is we did get, and I'm getting into the weeds here a little bit, we have a partnership with the USAID, as well as, some U.S. brands. A lot of them really want to geolocate their impact to the U.S. They want to make sure they're doing right within their borders, and so have talked about how can we really help within the continental United States. Our problem is finding processors. There doesn't seem to be any lack of collectors, right? Even a Girl Scouts group wants to go out and clean up plastic on the beach on weekends, right? So there is a high degree of engagement from the American population, but I think the processing capability is what we're trying to be very, very careful about, because at the end of the day, it's our reputation. We need to make sure that we've fully vetted. Some technologies haven't been approved, a little bit controversial in the US, but yeah, we're trying our best. So in the meantime, we encourage everyone not to wait, no pun intended, but there's no time to waste on this issue. So please, wherever you can, please help today, and let's start to your point, just start somewhere and hope to improve as we go how we deal with plastic waste.
Right. At least get it out of nature And then we
Yes.
can work on getting it all recycled. And then at some point, we probably want to consume less plastic.
Absolutely not at some point. We should be doing that today, right? So, I mean, we say this at WWF all the time, right? There is that portion of plastic usage which is absolutely essential. And we just came through COVID, so everybody can understand, like just in the medical space, I think we'd all be a goner if we didn't have plastic in the medical space. So, there are some very important applications around plastic, whether it's food security, food safety, medical applications. So we should think about, how do we reduce unessential plastic use, right? That's something we need to be doing today, because not only do we have credits that take care of the downstream problem, you need to address the upstream problem, right? Yeah. Credits is absolutely not our silver bullet to this.
But you might be buying time.
You are buying time, for sure. And by the way, and I was saying this in one of the Greenpeace comments that was made when I was in Hong Kong, I said, look, we all I want to live in a Greenpeace world. I mean, I do. And the truth is if tomorrow we had an absolutely perfect replacement for plastic, we had all the infrastructure built to produce it, all the companies, put in all the investments to support it, and we could get out of plastic tomorrow. Let's just say that happens. Who's going to clean up the 80 years worth of plastic debt that's already out there, that's like 8.5 billion tons? Somebody's got to clean that up, right? We can't just leave it floating out there.
For sure.
So we need to think about a solution set, which includes upstream, reduction of plastic usage, and downstream cleaning up of plastic usage, and everything in between, in order to try and solve this problem. The good news is I feel much more confident that we can do this. We can be the generation that solves this problem, because we do have what it takes to solve it. Unlike in carbon, which feels a little bit more complicated, this is actually something we can do. And we've proven we can do it so far in the Philippines. And if we can do it here, holy cow, everybody else can do it too.
It's just amazing. And I have to say, I've been working a lot in blue tech space, and seaweed plastic is on its way. I mean, companies like Flexi, they're still in a bit of an exploratory phase, but we are not far at all from having great substitutes that are completely biodegradable. But we probably won't get out of a world where we want our potato chips in a little bag. That's going to be hard to turn around, especially in the United States. So tell me about where you are today. Are you fundraising for this business? What's going on? What are the next steps for you guys?
So right now, because a lot of folks have taken quite an interest in the work we do, and we wanted to make sure we separated the governance of the standards as well as the sale of credits, which feels like a conflict of interest. We've actually separated the business into two. We've got a nonprofit entity which holds this and develops the standards, the eco label, does the consulting work. I wanted to make sure we were keeping that in the nonprofit and helping as many people as we can, keeping it open source. And then we have the for-profit business, which deals purely in the raising money through credits to support projects. So those are the two different things. And right now, I'm sure our CEO would tell you that we're thinking very seriously about doing some fundraising for that business, because we feel like it's reached a point where we can really help scale a lot of the efforts around the world. There's enough momentum around plastics, especially because of the UN treaty. And by the way, when have you ever seen the UN do anything on time? So this is incredible that they are moving on schedule to get a real treaty out by 2025. So we think that it's time to go out, and not that we lack funding necessarily, but I think what we need is what comes with the funding, right? If we can find partners that can help us surface the initiative and really set us up for success in the markets that we want to operate in, get in front of folks. I mean, I can't possibly do that myself through my own network, so I think it's super important that we work with like-minded partners who can really help us deliver real change on this issue.
I have a feeling that you're going to get a lot of people behind you. There's this whole new generation of people that put mission before business in their business, and it's really exciting. And I'm seeing a lot of funds pop up that are really mission driven, and it's not the fake stuff. They're really looking for putting nature, climate, cleaning up pollution first.
I'd really like to say that I don't think that those are mutually exclusive. I actually think that the work we do helps business, and it's not a choice between one or the other. I think that, and this is demonstrated by the big brands that we currently work with who have not only leveraged this in terms of kind of PR. This is not CSR. This has now become regular business practice for them, and I think that that is incredible, and I'm hoping that people will support brands that do that.
What advice would you have to other new entrepreneurs who are diving into this mission-driven world of innovation?
Don't ever give up hope, right? And even if you don't understand necessarily where your passions are going to lead you, have some faith, just put one steady foot in front of the other, trying to make the best decisions you can at each step. And you never know where this is going to take you. I never thought I was going to wind up in this space, but I don't know if it's fate or whatever gets you to where you're supposed to be. And even if you only make a little bit of difference, it's still, the world needs it. There is no time like now where the world needs people who are trying to do the right thing. So please don't ever give up. We have a duty to hope.
I love it. I love it. Thank you, Nanette, for joining us today. I think Nanette's story shows incredible humility, recognizing with her Hope fundraiser that in helping one problem, in this case raising money for schools through sales of bottled water, she had worsened another, plastic pollution. But what's so inspiring is how she acted on that realization by creating the Plastic Credit Exchange, aimed at managing plastic waste on a global scale. In addition to being a story of personal drive to make the world a better place, Nanette's story shows us how countries like the Philippines are bearing the brunt of the world's plastic problem. We also learn of the new global plastic standards coming around the world thanks in part to Nanette's work. Thank you, Nanette, for your time here today and for your good work. And thank you for listening. Please follow the Happy Planet podcast wherever you listen and leave us a rating and review. It really helps new listeners discover the show. I am the executive producer. The talented Dylan Hoyer is our producer and editor. Composer George Brandel Egloff created our theme music. Learn more about my work and get in touch by visiting happyplanetcapital.com.